Okay, hello and welcome to our audience members joining us from across the globe. I'm Raymond Karam, the Chief Program and Development Officer here at the Arab Gulf States Institute. We're bringing you an exciting conversation today from the perspective of some of the finest regional experts as we look at how Gulf partners are gearing up for the return of President-elect Trump to the White House. We planned this conversation before the sudden escalation of events in Syria, but I'm sure our speakers will touch upon the repercussions of the fall of the Assad regime and the future of Syria and the region. Now we'll introduce our speakers briefly and then share their full bios in a chat with you all. First, I'd like to welcome back Mohammed Baharoon, the Director General of Buhuth, which he established in 2002 in Dubai, the UAE. He had a career in media where he worked as a reporter for Al-Arabi magazine, as a writer for Al-Ittihad newspaper, and then as an editor for Gulf Defense magazine. Also, a warm welcome to Al-Saif. He is an assistant professor of history at Kuwait University, a non-resident fellow at AGSIW, and the founding president of Al-Saif Consulting. He has over 2 decades of experience researching and working in the Gulf Arab states, notably as deputy chief of staff to a former Kuwaiti prime minister and senior vice president of the oil and gas sector at Agility. Also, warm welcome to my colleague Kristin Diwan, Senior Resident Scholar at AGSI. Her current projects concern generational change, nationalism, and the evolution of Islamism in the Gulf countries. Her analysis of Gulf affairs has appeared in many publications, among them Foreign Affairs, Financial Times, and the Washington Post. Moderating the conversation is Hussein Ibish, Senior Resident Scholar at AGSI. He's a weekly columnist for The National, a former columnist for Bloomberg, regular contributor to The Atlantic and The Daily Beast, and a frequent contributor to many other US and Middle Eastern publications. And with that, Hussein, over to you.
Thank you so much, Raymond. Welcome, everybody. This is exciting. We have an amazing panel here. I mean, really, two great experts from the region and one great expert of the region. So the amount of brain power and knowledge here is pretty intimidating to me. I'm a little, I'm a little intimidated, but I'm eager to learn. So this is great. Well, we have a returning president here. Donald Trump has pulled off the miraculous feat of being a president and losing an election and then coming back. It's been done before, but only once, and here it's been done a second time. So the question is, how will that impact U.S. Gulf relations? How will Gulf countries be responding to this? What about maximum pressure on Iran? What sort of Middle East and what sort of Gulf region is Trump going to be inheriting from Joe Biden? What sort of situation is he going to be dealing with here? What about especially where a weakened Iran is going to go in terms of its relationship with these countries? What about the Gulf countries' transition to a post-hydrocarbon economy and U.S. relationship with the energy industry, et cetera? There are so many questions that we will be tackling. But I want to get the take of everybody first, the big picture. I want a 30,000-foot overview. Yeah, just generally, what comes to mind? I'm not asking you for a thorough analysis. I just want one or two things that come to the forefront of your mind when you think about on January 20th, Trump will be inaugurated, right? We'll get to the last days of Biden later on because we will deal with that. But what are you anticipating for, say, the first couple of months of the Trump administration in terms of Gulf interests, U.S. Gulf relations, et cetera? Let's start, like ladies first, right? Let's start with Kristin. Just a couple of thoughts. It doesn't have to be an overview or anything like that, but just what comes to your mind?
Well, Hussein, I usually kind of prep my comments and I have a few things in mind to say. And I had my anticipation of what was going to happen with the Trump administration. And when I looked at it from the regional perspective, I thought, well, the cards are lining up pretty well for him in a way. I think there's been, a lot of the current conflicts have progressed enormously in disastrous ways, but in ways that had then come to some looking towards a resolution in a way. I think the pressure on Hezbollah and also on the Iranians has been so much that we've already seen a deal kind of shaping up in Lebanon, and Iran sending all kind of signals that they're willing to deal with the Trump administration. The Israelis had pressed so much, forward, both in getting buffer zones, both in Lebanon and all of northern Gaza. I don't know kind of what else more they could press for. I mean, they can press further, but I think, there was clearly a point where I think they could start to be looking towards a deal. And we've seen even Hamas coming back to the table. All of these are setting up well for at least getting, some sort of pause and resolution I wouldn't say resolution because I don't think resolution's there. But I don't know. My thoughts are kind of shifting, I think, in this current moment, watching what's happening in Syria. And I'll just throw this out there and we'll get into more detail later. I think the MO of Trump is very much that he presses really hard, gets all of the things of leverage that he has on the table to push for the best deal he can get.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at this region and I look at, Israel's now bombing in Syria, we don't know what kind of the government's going to shape up there. Every time I think about Syria, I think about a conflict that doesn't stay very much in Syria. And we can
Mm-hmm.
talk about that. I know this is a government that's probably really going to be wanting to focus on the home front, but that just has not been historically the case. And I am just kind of a little wary of Trump if he comes in here, the kind of administration, if he wants to really press, he's pressing on the side, I'm sure, of an Israeli government that's already kind of going maximalist in the region. It does kind of harbor more concern for me about where that's going to lead us. And I'll let the others speak and give their thoughts.
Okay, Mohammed, greetings. Good to see you again. I asked you the same question. First couple of thoughts about, incoming Trump administration, whatever you want to say.
Thank you very much. Wonderful to be with all of you. And I'll pick up your question on what type of GCC is President-elect Trump is inheriting. And I think the GCC is possibly going to be more economically focused rather than security focused. That is the one that he inherited the first term. The GCC is going to be far more connected globally rather than just connected to one ally over the other. So it's going to be less politically polarized. And I think it would have a different security matrix in mind, where they will need to build more roads than walls, if you want. Where Iran is not as big of a threat as it used to be, not because it is weakened, but at least in my view, because it's changed. The terrorist organizations are not the existential threat that it used to be once before. They've developed so many ways to deal with that, and some of those ways seems to be working. And they have less quote unquote enemies, if you want. So Israel used to be an enemy. It's not an enemy anymore. Iran used to be an enemy. It's not an enemy anymore. Turkey used to be a foe. It's not a foe anymore. And again, that's the type of the GCC. It's going to provide him possibly with more tools to engage across the world. So if he needs to engage in a different way with with Iran, with Pakistan, with India, with Korea, then he's got a different set of tools at his hand. But also, we might find challenges if this concept of global competition turns into acute polarization, and I don't think he will see a lot of cooperation on that from the region.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. That was really interesting and comprehensive, and I appreciate it. Badr, maybe best for last, you go ahead and give us your response.
Thank you, Hussein. It's
So
always a
good to be with
pleasure
you.
to be in the midst of esteemed scholars and friends that I always learn and benefit from. Let me start by acknowledging and honoring the unjustly decimated, detained, and displaced in Syria, Palestine, and across the region. I hope justice and peace prevails in this region. Let me give you a view from the Gulf and then trip over to the incoming Trump administration. So as we started the conversation before we began the webinar, I've been busy traveling. So I was in the Manama dialogue and after it at the Doha Forum. And I can tell you the themes that come up when speaking to various Gulf experts or Gulf officials is that those three themes pop up: agency, empowerment, engagement, and partnership. And it takes me back to two important moments in 2024. We just concluded the GCC summit in Kuwait 10 days ago. And we had the launch of the first ever GCC Vision for Regional Security in March in Riyadh. And let me dwell a bit on these three themes. So by agency, you see a more self-reliant Gulf that is willing to take more matters into its own hands. We've seen this happen on various files, whether when dealing with the Americans or with other places and countries in the region and files. We've also seen the notion of engagement, that this is not going to happen only on files that are important to the Gulf, but files that can touch on other parts of the world. So for example, the whole focus on digital economy, cybersecurity, AI. There is more of an intention of not only engaging for the sake of the Gulf's interests, but how can the Gulf contribute to the global discourse on these issues? And then finally, partnership. How can we deliver on this? This is not something that the Gulf can do on its own. It would require more bridges and connecting doors, as Mohammed and Kristin were alluding to. And that will be the lens in which the Gulf states come into dealing with Trump. Now, obviously, the Gulf states are no monolith. You have different views and agendas. But I think the overarching themes of de-escalation within the region, within the neighborhood, and assertiveness will carry its way through. The stars are lined up for Trump, really, if he wants to benefit from the Gulf states beyond Gulf and Middle East issues.
I wanted to ask all of you if you think, because each one of you in your own way have kind of alluded to the way in which Trump is going to inherit a situation that's rife with possibilities. In other words, a lot of changes have taken place over the past few years, some of them independent of the United States, some of them the consequence of Biden's policies, good and bad. It strikes me that, he's inheriting, for example, a situation where Iran is much weakened as a hegemon, maybe broken as a hegemon even, but not as a power. And where Iran is asking for talks, suing for negotiations, but it still has the potential to try to sprint towards a bomb and to try to seek regime, survival through that kind of means. They're willing, they may be willing to do a deal on that. They may be willing to do a deal even on their relationship with the militia movement that has failed them. And really only the Houthis remain kind of even plausibly a potent tool. So let's start with the question of Iran.
Kristin, maybe you should start.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know my colleague, and he's here in the office with me, so I can't explain that one, but
Go right ahead. Yeah,
okay.
Kristin. Yeah.
I'll jump right in.
Yeah.
Okay, so starting with the issue of Iran, like I said, I mean, I think you described it well. I mean, Iran is really back on its heels. I think as you said, there's plenty of room for some negotiations to be here. And I think absolutely when we look at the Gulf countries and their relations towards Iran, they will be all for trying to get to the sort of resolutions that, as my colleagues Mohammed said, will allow them to keep forward with their economic transformations. So I think they would like to see this plane land in a safer way. But I do think that there's going to be a lot of issues that are going to come with that, with how the Trump administration seeks to approach that. Because as I said, I think the Trump administration likes to line up all of its leverage before it gets down to the deal making. And the one place where we know we see that leverage may be coming to bear is also in Iraq. We know that if we look at going towards kind of maximizing the economic sanctions, which is where I think the Trump administration will look first, that's where they see the most possibility for increasing sanctions, is to pressure the Iraq government. And I think that was kind of where their mindset was. I'm hoping, though, that, again, they reflect on this in the current situation, because as I mentioned, I think the regional picture is a little bit even more unstable right now with what's happening in Syria.
Yep.
And I think obviously people are probably quite nervous in Iraq and also in Jordan and other neighboring states. So it might be a time to have some
Extremely
reflection about how to, to tread a little bit maybe more lightly. And I think a Trump administration will want to keep that in mind as well, because as much as he likes leverage, it's usually towards the goal of having an arrangement and an overall deal. And I don't think this is an administration that wants to see much greater unrest and a spread of already the conflict in the region. So.
Yeah, well, we'll find out. The first Trump administration, the first Trump term, couldn't decide if maximum pressure was in order to get a better deal or in order to create the conditions for regime change. But Mohammed, what do you think about the triangular relationship between the Gulf countries, Iran, and the United States under these current very changed circumstances? Are
Sorry.
you? I think you're still on mute, Mohammed. Yeah.
On maximum pressure, or even what is now described as hyper pressure, being waived. I think no. Pressure has always been a means to a tool. A tool or a means to an aim, and the aim was quite obvious from the previous Trump administration, was another deal, a better deal, a fairer deal, but another deal. And I think the administration kept saying, President Trump also kept saying that he's open for a new deal with Iran. I think the situation right now opens up a pathway to such a deal. And if the objective of the pressure is to change the behavior of Iran, I think we've seen some indications that behavior is changing, particularly now in Syria, but possibly since the beginning of the war on 7th of October. The behavior with the region has been changing. So this is not the region engaging with Iran. We've seen Iran engaging with the region. And since President Pezeshkian came in, there has been, an overstated, if you want, focus on economic connectivity, either through the development road or through attracting foreign direct investment. They're talking the type of talk we're talking about in the Gulf. So there is a possibility that they have realized that a major tectonic shift has happened in the region. We're not playing the game of sectarianism. We're not playing the game of geopolitical power, struggle. Everyone in the region is following an economic integration. This is the name of the new game in town, and they don't want to be standing with their ball in their hand, with nobody else to play with.
Yeah. Badr, what do you think about the triangular U.S.-Iran Gulf relationship under current circumstances?
Well, let me unpack each party. So with Trump, we're used to contradictions and confusions and multiple messages if we're basing it off of Trump 1.0. Now, there will be competing strands within his administration based on the appointments that we've heard being put out, whether the isolationist or the neoconservative interventionist strands will, win him over. It's going to be maybe a healthy tension to keep everyone on guard, including his enemies. And that's probably part of the strategy. So that's one element that we're going to see from the Trump administration. The reported meeting between Elon Musk and the Iranian ambassador in New York is one certain indication of him playing with different options. Now, on the Iranian side, they've been banking on their own triangle as well, whether it's missile weapons, the proxies, and the nuclear file. Now we've seen those elements really go under strain, especially the axis of resistance, which isn't fully dead, but I think it's much weakened and will be reorienting itself in certain ways. But the missiles have been also quite degraded in the past few months.
Oh, yeah.
And this will probably have them push more on the nuclear file, which we've seen them dabble with in the last few days. I think, look, with all that's happening within Iran, I think there is some pragmatism in Iran. Regime security comes first. And they'll be able to manage now with a reformist, quote unquote, president that can, play plausible deniability for Khamenei to move in and to try to factor the different elements that the government can push in, and then he can pull in the plug or endorse whenever he thinks is needed. And that's, if I go to the third triangle, that's where the Gulf can play a very useful role between the two parties, a role that they were not given when the Obama administration pushed on with the JCPOA without much, reliance on the Gulf. I think we can play a healthy role in connecting the various parties together. And I hope that the incoming administration takes notice that this is something that we can do. The Iranians have been reaching out to the Gulf states. We've had a common informal meeting in Qatar 2 months ago with the Iranians, which hasn't happened as a GCC collective in many, many years, since
Right.
2007. So there is an opportunity there, and I just hope that they make use of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's really right, and I appreciate it very much. Now, what about the role of Israel? Because a lot of commentators here in the United States are going to be either saying or implying that given the performance of the Israeli military and intelligence services over the past 15 months, Israel has emerged as the dominant power in the region and the paramount power in the region. I'm not sure that that's true, but I'm not sure it's not true either. And what I'm kind of wondering is, what about Israel-Gulf relations? President Trump is likely to push Saudi Arabia into to normalize with Israel without the kind of terms that Saudi Arabia has been, saying are required. I don't know his chances of that, but the question is sort of, again, the triangular relationship, U.S. Gulf, Israel. And again, let's start with Kristin. What do you think?
I mean, as I alluded to before, I think if you look at the Israeli situation, they've really taken the opportunity, I guess you could say, to strike out very forcefully at all of their perceived threats. So from a military perspective, there's no question that, I mean, Hamas is much weakened. They have more territory, buffer zone within Gaza. Hezbollah is quite devastated, I think, much reduced. They have a buffer zone now, greater there. They're in the process of taking a buffer zone as well in Syria, and are in the act of bombing, I guess, as well, military sites all across Syria as well, to weaken whatever emerges from Syria from being able to have a threat. So in that sense, you would think that they would be feeling a bit more secure and could turn to, thinking about a situation where they could look more towards diplomacy and a political horizon. I'm not sure that's where the mindset is in Israel, though. So I think when we look at this question of the Trump administration, what they can do, how they can deal with the Gulf states and use the Gulf states as sort of either on the case of the Emirates, I would guess is kind of a bridge to talking to Israel, or in the case of Saudi Arabia, as kind of a leverage to push for the political concessions that would need to be made. And in this case, I'm talking really about the Palestinians.
Yeah.
And a reformed Palestinian government to get them on that political track, I think is an open question. I think if Israel were willing to embark on that path, they would definitely find some willing parties in the Gulf states to encourage them. I'm just not terribly optimistic from what I'm seeing that they are moving in that direction.
Definitely not. And I don't see Trump pushing them in that direction either. However, you never know. Mohammed, what are your thoughts about the Israeli role in the region and the Gulf states, the relationship with Israel, which is very different? I mean, obviously, UAE and Bahrain have one kind of relation, Saudi another, Kuwait, Qatar another, etc.
I'll take your point about Israel as a hegemon.
Yeah.
And
Well, no, people are not talking about Israel as a hegemon because it's not really projecting influence. They're talking about it simply as a dominant power, as a power that has demonstrated strength, unparalleled strength in the region. Yeah. Just to be
yes,
clear.
Israel at this point is the one country in the region that uses military might more than any other state.
Yeah.
And in multiple theaters. Some of those theaters are, populated by civilians.
Yeah.
So this is something that we have to figure out. Now, if Iran is quote unquote reformed and have changed behavior, that would lead Israel to be the one country that is using military power within the Arab states.
Yeah.
And that is something that would need to push the US to deal with this. How are you going to deal with this? Are we going to say that, look, with Iran now of less of a threat, more economically engaged, focused, possibly just like the GCC, and an Iran that says that it wouldn't mind accepting a two-state solution, is this the time we go and do this at this point and do something similar to what is happening or could be happening in Lebanon, where there is a demarcation of land borders and eventually a peace between the two countries. And could we do something, envision something like that similar in Palestine? And that could be a game changer. But a Trump administration that is focused on making America great again, economically great, would need focus from Israel on allowing that economic connectivity to happen. And if those attacks continue, stopping all of those projects, including IMEC, then U.S. economic agenda is going to be, will not be benefited. And I think this is where I could make a little bit of a advertising for Arab Gulf States Institute, because that was the title of an article that you've just published by me and two other people.
It's terrific. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Mohammed. Badr, what about the Israeli role and the Gulf states and the Trump administration?
Sure. I mean, another triangle, right? Lots of triangles in this webinar.
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
doing triangles. Actually, that's what we're
That's
going to
good.
do. Yeah.
At least we're forming something. That's
Oh no,
important.
we're playing the game of triangles.
Let me begin with the latest. Look, Israel is playing with fire. What's happening in Syria right now with them eradicating the buffer zone that's been there since 1974, with them being kilometers away from Damascus, this is going to be to the detriment of Israel's own security in the long term. It's not going to serve them well if they want to see themselves as a welcomed state in the Middle East. I mean, those attempts are not translating into that kind of effort. Now, obviously, the Trump administration will probably go back to a form of the Abraham Accords that it started, but it's coming back to a different region. And the Saudi calculus, even during the discussions prior to October 7, and that was one of my arguments in a recent piece in Foreign Affairs, When you survey the Saudi official position, when talking to different officials and looking at things on the ground, they've always had the Palestinian state in mind. And it
Right.
was always part of a segmented strategy in which they cover the U.S. Uh, Saudi component first, and then they move on into the Palestinian component, but then the war came in the way. The Saudis have upped the game. They've been very clear in how they present their non-negotiables. Their red line is quite clear that there should be a two-state solution. They've put it out in various statements, whether by the Crown Prince or the Saudi Foreign Minister. We've seen them last September in the UN, co-sponsor with the EU and Norway, a global alliance for the implementation of the two-state solution. And that has been meeting, and it's been meeting with over 94 states. They met in Riyadh in October, they met in Brussels in November, they're meeting in Oslo next month. And what they're doing there is they're asking each state to be very pragmatic and practical in what steps each state can do to push along the lines of the two-state solution, even when elements of both sides in Israel and Palestine are probably not ready for that. But it's about setting the stage. Now, this is important and it pairs with the Arab Islamic Extraordinary Summit that happened in Riyadh in November of this year and in November of last year. I hope that the Trump administration listens to all of that. And it's also important for the Saudis and other Gulf states to come in early on to mention how they see things moving forward. Because if he wants a grand deal, he can get one, but he needs to use US leverage to get there. Now, trying to sidestep the Palestinians, trying to think of it as an economic issue is not going to happen. It's very
Yeah.
simple. This is an occupation. And it's an occupation that's happening as we speak in Syrian lands, particularly, but it's also something that we've seen in the West Bank and Gaza over the past few years. I think where we stand in the Gulf, and this is the beauty of the Gulf, if you may, that it encompasses and absorbs diversity. You've mentioned, Hussein, at the beginning that we have different views towards Israel. And the GCC makes use of these different avenues to get to
Right.
the two-state solution, whether it's the normalization path that the Bahrainis and the Emiratis tread, or the mixed approach of the Qataris with mediation or the Saudis when negotiating, or the standalone approach of Kuwait. I think it all fits in the grand scheme of things, and it needs to be put into use.
Well, I hope it does. I think the one thing that October 7 and subsequent events throughout the region have demonstrated is the centrality of the Palestinian issue. Again, no one can doubt that. I mean, anyone who thought this was resolved or faded away or no longer important, it just changed everything. Everything. And still, it's not done even. The earthquake is not over. I mean, the fall of Al-Assad is directly connected to October 7 in various ways. Netanyahu wants to take credit for it. That's nonsense. But certainly, it is the consequence of a series of a cascading series of catastrophic successes, if you could put it that way. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on the Palestinians in this case because I think it's been covered quickly, but I do want to bring in, before we get to kind of theoretical issues, I want to bring in China. But before that, I also want to remind the viewers that you can ask questions through the Q&A function, and I will pass them along. We're going to begin that process pretty soon. So if you have any questions, send them along. Let's talk about the Chinese, right? Because Trump has this very complicated relationship with China, where he's very hostile to China, but he likes Xi Jinping he admires him as a tough, strong, absolutist. And he's sort of talking about tariffs and a trade war and what have you, but many people think that that is just, a negotiating stance. The Gulf countries have been developing much closer ties with China, but in very different ways in many cases. So this is one area that could be, a source of division between Washington and various Gulf countries in the next 4 years. Or it could be an opportunity for cooperation to advance the interests of both sides vis-a-vis the Chinese. What do you think, Kristin?
Well, I think it's an interesting question, and I think where I come out on it is a bit where you were hinting at the end. I think there are very different perspectives on China coming from the Gulf region as there is coming from the Trump administration. If we look at the first Trump administration, when I talk to people that, were working as, ambassadors and stuff in the region, when they were given their orders of their interest in the Gulf, China was very much near the top of that. And they saw the Gulf partners as they should be partners to help the U.S. push back against China. And I think there are certainly parts of the U.S. administration that sees this competition as the most important one, that sees it as a competition and sees it in a little bit zero-sum game, where we should be pushing back, and where the U.S. gains, China will be losing. I think that's very much not where the Gulf is at all. And it works very much in opposition to where the Gulf wants to see their future as this kind of a networked region that's helping to build this kind of prosperity across the different regions. So I think it will be interesting to see again, and it's kind of a common theme, where the different interests of a Trump administration land, and if the kind of more deal making and desire for prosperity side of things works out with China over what I have seen as a predominant viewpoint, which is the kind of security and competition angle of a Trump administration.
You think we're back to the kind of Navarro attitude of zero-sum, binary competition, even confrontation?
I mean, that's what we've seen previously, and I think that is pretty strong within the formation.
Yeah, if that's the case, it's going to be very hard to cooperate with the Gulf agenda, because it's going to be very different. What do you think, Mohammed?
Again, I think the Gulf looks at a lot of opportunities when it comes to economic integration, or connectivity rather than integration. And if the Make America Great Again approach is an economic approach, which is quite evident in a lot of the things that has been said, then at least the previous experience seems to suggest that tariffs is not going to help that. It's actually going to reduce it. So the objective of the first term by Trump in his China policy was to try and bring back factories, infrastructure in the US back to work. And the advice he got was that let's prevent Chinese products from getting into the US. That is the only way we can use the, or rejuvenate the steel market, if you send, or the factories in the US. And I don't think that has worked until now very well. So what could be an alternative approach to that? And the alternative approach is that we need to expand the market rather than limit it. And there is a lot of expansion that could happen in fresh markets, specifically Africa and South America and Asia. And that type of connectivity agenda that is being developed, that is where the US can find new type of opportunities that could be shared among others. So if the idea is focused on economy, then economy would require more globalization rather than deglobalization, decoupling, de-risking, whatever you want to call it. But if the calculus is military, then that's a different issue. And I think that the whole world, not only the Gulf region, is possibly trying to de-risk the militarization of situation. We've seen this very recently in South Korea, and that whole political fiasco was connected somehow to this idea of more of a nuclear umbrella expanded in the South China Sea. And this could happen. But to go back to what Badr has said about Israel and Palestine, I want to second what he said. One of the things he will inherit is a Gulf that is far more focused on the two-state solution. I will add to say that he will also inherit an America that is far more focused on two-state solution, not only the Gulf.
But not a Republican Party, that is.
Well, I'm talking about a new generation of
I
American.
understand. I know what you're talking about. You're not wrong.
So it's not
No,
only
no, I get
the
your
Gulf.
point. No, I get your point. You're right. But I'm also right, which is, is the people he's beholden to don't share that view. But Badr, let's get your take on the Chinese angle. This is the last triangle we're doing. So what about the Chinese?
My geometry was not my best subject in school, but
Me
I
You're
like
doing
triangles.
great. You're doing
I
amazing.
do well. So let me, since Mohammed raised the important issue of militarism and combativeness, I don't think, and I agree with him, the mood in the region is not, there is no desire to return to a combative phase. It's not going to serve their interests, even if there is a push of some sort from the US for whatever reason. Now, going back to China, look, there has always been that whole discursive tradition in the last few years with some uh, policy translations in that there is great power competition, you need to choose sides. The Gulf states want none of that. We don't see ourselves, we'd rather not see ourselves to be viewed through the lens of this so-called great power competition. We don't want to be choosing sides. And I think, and I agree with Mohammed here, higher tariffs is a very limited way of looking at global economy and the notion of growth. And weaponizing the economy is not going to do well for anyone, even if it's not directly targeted at us in the Gulf states. And I think that's a delicate file that we need to keep communicating our wishes on how we see the different relationships between China, the US, and other powers. And again, playing that upping our game within the Gulf to play a role in which we explain the positionalities of the two and trying to segue it moving forward. There is so much that can be done on this file, but trying to push that into an uncharted terrain. And let me bring in also oil, Hussein, if you allow me,
Of course.
because the whole notion, and it's connected to trade, the whole notion of drilling and pumping more oil and lifting restrictions and trying to secure the oil market. Look, we've been working so hard with the Russians and the OPEC Plus conglomerate to maintain prices for the benefit of our own economies. We're banking on a certain level or rate of a higher oil return to funnel those development plans. Now, and Trump ironically came in and mediated between the Russians and the Saudis during COVID to end one of those sour episodes in the price wars. So to come in with that attitude, that's not going to bode well for us and arguably even for the American economy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. Now, okay, we're done with triangles. All right, so let's talk about yeah, let's talk about how the Gulf is reacting to the events in Syria, the downfall of Bashar al-Assad, and the apparent victory of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and the SNA, which means strong Turkish influence, but also the rise of an Arab Islamist, even Salafist jihadist group to prominence in Syria, a group that initially served as a front for Daesh and then thought that it would be a good idea to break with Daesh and join Al-Qaeda. So in other words, a group that history does not inspire the utmost confidence in many people. But I'm wondering how you think the Gulf countries are reacting to the events in Syria. And we'll just keep going right around. So Kristin again.
Yeah. Well, just as we're turning to Syria, I wanted to say, of course, the collapse of the Assad regime or being brought down is going to bring a lot of uncertainty. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are fearful about that. Everyone's kind of looking to that and trying to think about, what their interests are in this uncertainty. But I did want to underline, I think all of us have probably been watching the videos of people getting released from prisons. I've listened to incredibly moving Syrians talk about what this means for them. I mean, the kind of fear that they themselves lived under for decades underneath both Assads, it needs to be said.
It's been 50 years.
Bears weight as well. And so I think I understand why they can take a moment, and they deserve a moment of kind of just at least celebrating this shift and this moment of potential, at least possibility for them. When I look at the Gulf states, it's very interesting, actually. I think that there's been clear divisions in how they've approached this topic, and they're basically linked into what their postures were on Syria previously. So we have the UAE, of course, which had led sort of the detente with the Assad government, had been looking to bring the Assad government back within the Arab fold, basically just through, I think, kind of realpolitik of believing that that was, we're going to be around, and it wasn't good to leave a vacuum, and perhaps they could persuade the Assad government to make arrangements that would allow them to be brought back into the fold. I think they're met by Bahrain and Oman, who kind of had that same perspective. The Saudis have sat quite differently here, and I think have a different posture historically towards Syria. Of course, they also joined in starting to bring Assad back into the Arab fold. But when I look at the reactions now to this collapse of the government, I do see really a distinction amongst those countries. The initial reaction of the UAE and the other two states was to try to initially kind of receive these calls and offer some support for the Assad government as it was going down. I guess, again, worrying about this uncertainty of what might be coming, especially under, as you mentioned, Hussein, the kind of Islamist background and radical Islamist background of some of the rebels. Saudi Arabia didn't engage with the Assad government there. And then notices now with the collapse of the government, at least the initial statements have been much more cautious, I would say, from those earlier few states, while Saudi Arabia's has been a little bit more embracing of the situation. So I'm just noting it's very early days. I don't know where things are going to go from here. I think probably all of the Gulf states share in that sort of possibility and hope that there can be some way of containing the situation within Syria in a way that's very beneficial to all of the Syrian people. But I am noting some distinctions, I guess, and the maybe the level of concern or the willingness kind of to engage.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, Mohammed, what do you think about all of that? And the kind of reaction, especially to the exchange of Assad for HTS SNA, it's a power base in Syria, if it can hold.
I would say that the UAE position towards Syria has been stable or constant, which is maintaining a governance in Syria, a state in Syria. And all of the discourse that we hear from the UAE and others of maintaining the unity of the state of Syria, we were afraid that there is going to be a collapse of the Syrian governance model. And we've seen that with the war economy, we've seen that with the Captagon, we've seen that with people from outside of Syria running the business, feeding money into the government and therefore controlling it. And the idea was to maintain a government model of some sort in Syria and use that then as a platform for change. And I think President Assad has got a lot of opportunities that he has frankly thrown one after another. The latest was the mediation that led to a call from President Erdogan for a meeting that should have helped reduce a lot of the tension between the two, and he also threw that away. Now, As we look at things in Syria today, I think we will still have the same type of position. And I think the communication coming out either from the foreign ministry or from the diplomatic advisor, Dr. Gargash, are in the same direction. We want to maintain a Syria that is, that has a functioning government that can deal state to state with others and is responsible for the security of others, including Lebanon, Iraq, and Jordan. These are the immediate answers. Now,
Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah.
well, this is not nice
No,
as in
I'm
something
being
that you would
sarcastic. I'm
receive as
being
a gift.
sarcastic because I don't think
I
that's
know, I mean, and I'm talking about your sarcasm.
yeah.
It's something that we need to work for rather than
Well, I
something
agree. I
nice we
agree
need
with
to
you. I
wait
just
for.
don't think it's likely. I mean, I'm feeling very kind of like um contrarian at the moment, but yeah.
It's a very strange situation in Syria.
Mm.
And I don't think we should be reading it as, something that has happened. I think there has been a lot of interaction going on underneath. A lot of the things that has
Without
happened
a doubt.
have happened
Yeah.
on their own. This is
Oh
not
yeah.
much. I
No,
mean, this is a
I agree with
meticulous.
you. The amount of under the table deal making that proceeded and went along with everything that's happened in the past 2 months regarding Syria is fantastic, obviously. It's just clear. But I'll tell you why I'm a contrarian. I just don't want to get my hopes up. You know, I'm Syrian. I can't let if I get hopeful and get my, get crushed again. So I'm just, bracing for the inevitable, whatever. And it's kind of a sour mood, but I think I came by it honestly. Um,
It's a
anyway,
very difficult situation. I totally understand, but we have to work for something.
no,
And I
I
think
agree.
there is now an opportunity.
Yeah,
If we've ever needed a regional security and cooperation architecture in
this is
this.
it. Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And also, I think, the Syrians have a glorious opportunity here to buck the trend, and I hope they do. Badr, what do you think? What about the Gulf role, and what is the Gulf reaction to what's happened in Syria? Again, particularly given the Turkish orientation of the SNA and the other orientation or history of the HTS.
I mean, basics, saying, look, Syria is for Syrians, and the past decade has witnessed the Syrian file moving away from Syria, Syrians and Arabs. And I'm
Yeah,
thinking here the Astana process. You have non-Arab states, Russia, Iran, and Turkey calling
mm,
the shots in Syria. This was hurtful to watch.
yeah,
And for me, to see Iran leave, but then Turkey come in is not certainly a welcome development. That's yet to be seen how that evolves.
yeah,
And the Syrians have been in a bind, really, between a regime like the Assad, if we start the list where it's not going to end, and by having now an Islamist administration in place. And I say Islamist, but then the CV is quite contradictory and it brings different impulses. Is it, former jihadist, posing in the last few weeks as a moderate slash post-Islamist? And I'm thinking here of the different, well-crafted actually
yeah.
messaging that came through in terms of talking to the minorities in Syria, comforting them, telling them
Messaging has
that
been
they're going
great.
to respect them. They even had they had a statement in Mandarin, imagine. So
Yeah.
they're talking to the Iraqis, to the Jordanians, the
Hmm.
amnesty that came out,
Yeah.
the non-interference with women's dress code. But all of this needs to translate into policy. I'd
Right.
like for them to walk the talk. Let's see how that evolves. And they're one segment of Syria's diverse community. So we
Yeah.
need to have more involvement by other local stakeholders. And we, as an international community, whether from the Gulf or other places, need to listen to Syrians. And we need to follow through what they think is best for them. The
Yeah.
UN SC has come up with 2254. That's already 9 years old. I think
Mm.
it requires an update. It
Yeah.
requires reformulation. And again, the listening to Syrians is first and foremost.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more about the UNSC. It needs to get off its backside. All right, so I'm going to bring in some questions here, and uh, Gauri Shankar Gupta wants to know about given the situation of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Assad regime. What do you think is going to be the relationship with the Houthis under current circumstances? How are they going to be dealt with? And Badr, you wanted to begin with that, I believe.
Look, the Houthis are the most nervous
Yeah.
at this moment because they're watching what's happening to their compatriots in arms, if you may. And it's not a good picture for them because Iran has not stood by their various junior partners, if you want to call them that, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah or even the Syrian state. And this is interesting because of this mix of partners or proxies, if you want to call them that. The Houthis are the most pure ideologically, so they're even the most distant when it comes to aligning with Iranian ideologies moving forward. So this is an interesting space to watch. I think we've seen the unfreezing of the Syrian conflict all of a sudden. It behooves the Gulf states, since this is their neighborhood after all, to push along the lines of advancing the unfreezing of Yemen on their terms, which respects the sovereignty and the interests of all Yemeni factions. The Houthis have been very stubborn when it came to them listening. I think now is the moment to present it. And I think they've been reaching out as well from my sources. So this is a good moment to push that file forward.
That's very good. It is an uncomfortable thing to be the last pin standing in a bowling alley. You know, you really might feel that something could be coming at you very soon. Kristin or Mohammed, do you want to add anything to that?
I think Badr nailed it.
Yeah.
Okay, Kristin. Yeah. Okay, so we agree on that. All right. Rita Spare asks if there are any thoughts about the meeting. Elaborate on thoughts about the meeting between Musk and the Iranian envoy at the UN at UNGA. I don't know much about it.
It's kind of hard to elaborate because I think we just don't know much. The only thing that came out was that, I mean, I guess the Iranians say that it did have to do with perhaps negotiations or towards kind of an unfreezing of that file. So that's all we have to go on. I think it's just the indication a little bit of how Trump will work. I mean, I think most people in the region took it as a promising sign. That at least this was an outreach towards perhaps a negotiated settlement, towards thinking about that, towards speaking to the Iranians. I think it's interesting as well to see the idea that, Trump is going to be using sort of very personal envoys, very direct envoys that might give us an indication about how he's going to be working. But I think that's about all we can read into.
I mean, can you see him sending a personal envoy to the Houthis? I find that a little hard to imagine, but maybe I'm wrong.
I think the Saudis have a larger role in that file to some degree.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Yeah, that
I'd
makes
see it. I think
makes
they're
sense.
very minor. I mean, they're not minor, but I think for Trump, the vision of it would that they would be.
Yeah.
You would go to the source, which would be Iran.
No,
I think that's probably how he thinks about it.
That's it. I think you nailed it. Yeah. So let's turn to a completely different kind of issue. It's one that Trump and people around him are very interested in, and Gulf countries, especially the UAE, but also Saudi Arabia and others, Qatar, are interested in, and might become a leading factor in U.S. Gulf countries' relations, at least some Gulf countries, which is AI and cooperation on AI. So I don't know. You nod, Badr. Do you have some thoughts about that?
Yeah,
Tell
let
me,
me
where
feed
could this
off.
go under Trump? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Mohammed will probably better place to comment because the UAE is now leading with the AI charge. And let me say, I mean, how forthcoming the UAE has been. This is admirable. When many years ago they placed an AI ministry and minister, people were laughing them off.
Mm.
And now they're laughing at people back. So I think this is something to listen to. And my comment here is, I think this is another promising file for the Trump administration to inherit from the Biden administration. And I'm thinking of the visit of MBZ to the US 2 months ago, where technology was in the name of the game at that stage. And the GCC summit communique, by the way, for the first time, goes into very important details on AI, on digital security. The Qataris have invested in that lately, over $1 billion in SME development in Qatar and abroad when it comes to such technologies, leveraging the post-oil era and using energy to fuel that AI drive is also key. And this is, look, this is an exciting space for such a young population like the Gulf. And
Yeah.
here I'm thinking of the many, many students that I teach at Kuwait University. And this, when I mention this in my lectures, their lives lit up. So I think this is a good direction to bring our peoples, if you may, together, and it doesn't stick to the state level as well. I think there's a lot there to be done. And this could be something that we can then leverage and use to actually resolve other issues that are intractable through that lens of building bridges and empowering other countries that don't have those energy needs. I think this is an important file.
Yeah, Mohammed, I would like to get your take on this, but I'd like you to talk about both directions, right? The ways in which, as Badr said, it could really promote conciliation and maybe even create new pathways, right, that are non-traditional for societies to deal with each other. But also, could it be a source of tension between, Trump-driven American government and with industrial policy and business, and a source of maybe not tension, but a competition that's less cooperative? I don't know. What do you think?
I think that AI is the new oil.
Mm.
There was a time we could not lit a lamp without oil. We could not move a car without an oil or run a factory without it.
Mm.
Today, we cannot lit a lamp without AI or move a car without AI. So this is the new oil.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the visit of His Highness to the US
Mm.
was something resemblance of a Quincy 2.0.
Mm.
And if the Quincy one was based on the oil
Mhm.
supplies, then this one is about the new oil supplies.
Mm.
Now, is this something that one country can own? This is
No.
not. You will need a lot of collaboration. You will need collaboration, as Badr said, on energy. And that means we will need far more energy than we needed before. And that is all of the drive, not only for hydrocarbon, but also for renewables. The second thing is that we need users, because users feed into AI. And the
Mm.
more users we get, the more, and that's why giving access to places where that access does not exist in, again, Africa, in Asia, in South America, will need a lot of collaboration. And I think this is where the GCC can come in. So we will need to power the data centers. We will need to spread those sensors. And of course, we will need a lot of ingenuity on applications that would use AI. So
Right.
that ingenuity would come from across the world, not only from the US.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. Kristin, what do you think about the AI drive of UAE, Qatar, even Saudi, et cetera, and others, with regard to the Trump administration, of course? Yeah.
I don't have a ton to say about it, but I would say that last point, I think, is what's most interesting to me. Obviously, the nexus is there. This is a nexus between energy, which it takes enormous energy to run AI.
Yep.
This is where the comparative advantage of the Gulf region really comes in, that and their enormous connectivity. So I think that they obviously could be supplying that, and from looking at a lot of the companies going to the Gulf, they see that advantage. I think what they will need, though, is the data, which means information and access to the, what feeds AI. And that's a more, me, I'm not an expert, but that's a more open question to me, about how that's shared, and whether it will be shared, and if we should be sharing, and the kind of regulations. I think this is kind of underregulated.
When you
area.
say what drives AI, are you speaking of energy or data or what?
Both.
Oh, energy and data. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I just wanted
And
to.
what I'm saying is the energy will a lot of it will be coming from the Gulf region, the
Mhm.
data, a lot of the input, the data, the users that they're using and building that from. My understanding is that it comes from, well, the US is the major holder of that. So I think
Well,
that's
but
where we have to think about
a
that.
lot of data hoarded by the Chinese state because they, unlike a company, get everything. When China is centralized, right? And in the US, it's often decentralized. But yeah, I think you're basically right. We have a question about the sovereign wealth funds and the resurgence of Abu Dhabi as a wealth hub, reshaping global finance diplomacy. What implication does that have for international relations in the region in light of the recent conflicts? And I would say also throw in light of the upcoming, second Trump term. Thoughts on that, please? Anybody know? I don't know.
Well, I would say immediately that sovereign wealth funds are initially companies. Yes, they're owned by states, but they're companies driven you know, by profit.
Sure.
That profit usually is guided by strategic sectors, which means they could be important in areas where not only the profit margin that will decide on which, but it is a different way of engaging. It becomes a tool for investment instead of a tool for direct developmental aid, if you want. And that allows it more sustainability, because developmental aid, you will provide a certain amount of money. Once it's over, it's over. But if it's an investment, then that return of investment will mean that it would exist in that place for a longer time.
I
Fair.
can come in here as well.
Please.
Um, the This is a site of leverage, if you may, for the Gulf states if they're going to pump up the transactional impulses in the Trump administration. We hold a huge promise. This region has one of the biggest reservoirs of sovereign wealth funds. The Kuwaiti one is the oldest, for example. So that's one direction. The other direction is many of these sovereign wealth funds have very clearly stated that their move is now to go local. So they're bringing back some of their money into Gulf economies because they believe in their promise. So that's also an invitation not only for American, investments or other state relations, but to use the Gulf as the hub to spring out ideas and to connect bridges, as Mohammed was alluding to earlier. So that is a site that can be built on to deliver some of those policy goals.
Yeah. Kristin, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, the latter one point that Better made was the one that stuck in my mind. I mean, when I, was back studying the PIF, which was not even something to study when I was looking at sovereign wealth funds, 15, 20 years ago. They were really much more oriented externally. And now we see a country like Saudi Arabia basically making the public investment fund as the main vehicle for the transformation of the state, which obviously it is investing outside, but the real focus, and they've said, is really about leveraging those partnerships and those relations that they build with companies to fuel the transformation inside of the country. I know that this is an area that's of huge importance to Saudi Arabia as well as the other states, is to engage the U.S. In that that effort, that enormous effort that's taking place. They need that partnership with these companies, with this intelligence, with this know-how to fuel all of these strategic sectors that Mohammed spoke about. So I know that that's a big priority. It is an interesting turn, though. I think a lot of us, when we heard about, the transformation, we thought we were going to hear a lot more about private sector, right? We're going to move from states to private sector. That has not been it. And I think in the world that we're looking at now, they're very state-driven economies, strategic sectors, as Mohammed said, that are chosen by the state and then looking for partners. But these are very much state vehicles. And I think that is something that Americans historically have been less comfortable with or suspicious of when those states are doing investments abroad or whatever. What are the political angles of that? So that will be a flashpoint. We've seen it in the past, could emerge again.
Yeah, but Trump and the Trump movement are not suspicious of it. I think they just see it as kind of normal and normative. It's they don't share the traditional American approach to commerce and the state and all of that. It's a bit different, right?
We'll see.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, right. We will see because we don't know who's going to populate the administration. Trump himself, I think that's true of. We don't know who ultimately is going to be confirmed and nominated and whatnot. So that's all true. Bill Rue has a good pushback. He said, we were talking optimistically. I don't know that that's true at all, but we were talking anyway about a two-state solution and the need for a two-state solution that is a consensus in the region. But he asks, how can we persuade the Israeli government, people, settlers, et cetera, to go along with this? And I would throw in the Trump administration. How are you going to? I mean, in a way, they had a vision of a two-state solution in the Peace to Prosperity proposal from January 2020, but that was a very unusual kind of two-state idea where the Palestinian state was going to be Lesotho, incorporated in a huge greater Israel without any external borders and without a lot of what normally passes for sovereignty. So, I guess Bill's pushing back on this makes some sense. Do you have any thoughts about where the leverage could come from, to move forward on this?
I would say peace and security.
Sorry,
If that's what Israel. Sorry.
let's begin with Mohammed, and then we'll go to Badr. Go ahead.
I would say peace and security, if that's what Israel wants, because as Badr has said, if there is no Palestinian state, that means there is occupation, and as long as there is occupation, there will be resistance, and this would perpetuate the security situation in the region. So unfortunately, we don't see this right now, but when the guns stop, that is going to be the big question. How can we make that, sustainable?
So you say if that's what Israel wants. I've been a student of the Israelis for a long time. I don't think it is what they want. I think they would rather keep, at this point, I think Israel's changed. I think Israel at this point would rather keep the most of the West Bank or all of the West Bank, the holy land that they have, rather than have peace and security. I think they prefer that. And I think if you gave most Israelis a choice right now, or at least a sufficient empowered number of them, need not be a majority, but there's enough of them who would rather take that land and keep that holy land and keep fighting than give it up and have peace and security. But anyway, Badr, what do you think? I mean, I had to push back, but Badr, what do you think?
Yeah, look, I mean, what you say has been it's continuous, right? So even after signing the Oslo Accords, you can trace the number of settlement expansion that happened after Oslo.
It
And
doubled
looking at
in the 70s.
exactly. So if you're looking at facts on the ground, it doesn't square with the claims of a two-state solution as per the gradual roadmap type peace approach with Oslo. Look, to Bill's question, optimistic? No, it's realistic. Because absent, as Mohammed said, I'm fully on board, absent having a viable two-state solution, the other option is an apartheid state, which we have right now. And that's the one that discriminates against people because of their background and ethnicity. And that's not going to give you security nor acceptance in the region. And any normal, healthy, forward-looking country would want that. Now, how can we change that trajectory?
It gives you October 7th is what it gives you.
Many October 7th, exactly. And what you need to do is, if Trump and his administration think highly of Israel, which I think they do, they need to recalibrate their approach because what they had as the deal of the century, and I go back to 2020, when I was reading through all of that, I'm like, which century is he referring to? Because with that with those elements,
19th.
you're not going to get
19th.
anything in this century.
19th
So
century.
probably. So you need to go back. You need to have groundwork about how this is going to happen. We need to show them that they are welcomed. The premise that Egypt and Jordan had in the past few decades was not promising, frankly. But what they saw with the Emiratis is. So how can they build on that if they wanted to?
Yeah.
Now, that could be used as leverage. The UAE was the highest in terms of pushing in humanitarian access. So they had some kind of leverage. Now, can we move that leverage from the humanitarian file to the political file? How can the Americans push the administration through? You talk to many Israelis on the ground, and not everyone is of that same opinion. Yes, it's shrinking, the actual two-state solution approach, but there is no other alternative. That's unfortunate. I mean, to them to think that they can keep the occupation and continue. You need to determine this will be a different kind of a two-state solution arrangement. There could be many things on the table. You can talk to the experts on this, but for example, you can have settlers as dual citizens. You can have Palestinians move back and forth with access to work. There's so much that can be built into the
Of course.
fabric of that two-state solution
Sure.
that we're not trying enough on.
No, it could take many different forms. The key is for the two peoples each to have self-determination and for all of them to have first-class citizenship somewhere, you know. Kristin, what do you think?
Yeah, I just want to bring this back to what I feel is the reality right now. Before we go off and everybody thinking about two states somewhere that could lead. And to me, it's really looking at the state of the Palestinians right now in Gaza, and how we can get to a ceasefire, which we still don't have, the return of the hostages, the Israeli hostages, and some kind of any sort of hope for a humanitarian situation that's livable. I mean, let's bring it back to like where the ground is right now in Palestine. And to me, the two-state solution is important only, I mean, it's important, but I guess I'm quite cynical about it at this stage. But it's just at least a vehicle, some kind of political horizon has to be agreed upon by the Israelis, or you're not going to get any of the kind of international engagement that will allow for other people to be more involved on the ground in Gaza, because the Gulf states are not going to go in there without at least that first step towards a political horizon. And if we don't have that political horizon, which basically means re-engaging with the PNA in some form, and there's a debate about that and disagreement amongst Gulf states about that, then we can't get beyond the state where we are right now in Gaza, which is basically the Israelis having extended now, I mean, pushed this huge population of now thrice times refugees into a much smaller region with completely inadequate humanitarian support for them. And I just don't want to see that continuing. So we need to get at least that political horizon. And that's really where I am right now, to get the Israelis to agree to that so that we can start to get kind of stop, I guess, what is a horrific situation that, could be ongoing.
No, it's a really important point, because when you've got someone as reactionary and sort of right-wing as Moshe Ya'alon saying Israel is conducting ethnic cleansing in northern Gaza, and clearly it is, then you've got a very grave situation indeed. I wanted to ask about Lebanon. What do you think the Trump administration is unlikely to get heavily involved in Lebanon, but it's still the case that the Gulf is heavily involved in Lebanon, and it's the question is, what do you do with the Lebanese file?
I mean, the Lebanese need to tell us what they want to do with the Lebanese file. The Gulf states have pushed back, wanting them to come to terms in which they can rebuild their own state institutions and come to an agreement on how to move forward. There was a glimmer of hope back in 2019 when there was an alternative view that sprung up, but then that was quickly eroded by developments and COVID and you know the old political class ganging up on them, frankly. So that needs to be sorted. There is an opening now, I think, with the stark weakening of Hezbollah that they can come to terms, and that's what they need to do. I wanted to add a quick comment on Israel. You know, you can push leverage by introducing sanctions. And sanctions can be done not only on individuals, but on a state level. And that needs to be something that we think of what kind of toolkit can push them to that political horizon, as Kristin has said. And sanctions have worked. Scientifically, they work when they come from your closest allies and partners. So if that happens to be the case, that can then change the behavior.
Can you describe that a little bit more? What did you, yeah, what would it look like?
So I'm thinking of how it took South Africa to change course and how the isolation of South Africa with time. Now, we haven't seen as much support for the Palestinian cause on a global scale as we have in the last year. We haven't seen the number of
okay, so you're
recognitions.
talking, wait, hold on. You're talking about sanctions against Israel.
I'm thinking, yes.
Okay, but I was okay. I mean, that's interesting. But I was asking, kind of thinking about the internal Lebanese
Oh,
situation.
sorry, you're on Lebanon. No, I moved to that other comment.
Okay, I'm sorry. I had asked. I'm sorry. I thought I had been.
I
more
started with
clear.
Lebanon and then I moved back to the
Oh,
Israel.
you moved back to Palestine. Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay. I
But
got
we can go
lost
back to
in.
Lebanon. I'll let
No,
my
no,
team
fine.
colleagues take it on.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought about sanctions on Israel. I just didn't
I'm done
get
with
the
it. I think
transition.
it's the next logical step. This is what
Fair
we
enough.
need to do. And I think if we couch it within the global alliance to implement the two-state solutions, that could be something that we put in. And it started, by the way.
All
It
right.
started on certain settlements, on certain settlers, and this can continue.
All right. I have a final question from Doug Silliman, the president of AGSI, which is a really good one, which is, can you talk more? We've talked about this a bit in the context of Syria, but can you talk more about the Gulf attitude towards Turkey under current circumstances? It seems to be a potential dividing point within the GCC and also potentially between the GCC and various different Gulf countries and the Trump administration, second term. So who wants to start with that?
I think just to talk about regards what we had 5 years ago or so, there's been a lot of Gulf outreach towards Turkey. I'm sure Mohammed can go into more details about this, but both the UAE and Saudi Arabia have made a lot more effort to go from what had been a pretty frictional relation to one that is more. I think, again, looking economically at the sort of economic connectivity and stuff, one that can be mutually beneficial to everyone in the region. I think drawing a big picture, and this is my own thinking right now, it's an interesting and very challenging time where, the kind of norms of international relations are being threatened, right? I mean, we have in a lot of places in the Middle East, like now state borders are being kind of invaded, and this is the kind of thing that are not respected, or at least temporarily not respected. And I think when we look at that kind of situation, we have obviously in Israel that is becoming quite powerful. And now we have a Turkey that's also asserting itself, especially as Iran is obviously being pushed back. I think for the Gulf states and more broadly the Arab states, that's tends to be a bit worrying. And they're wondering kind of what their role can be in that sort of environment. And I think obviously the way that they've tried to come in is through the angle of prosperity, and at least the
Mm.
Gulf states, and of trying to think about that, and of trying to be mediators to try to push back against the more
Mhm.
kind of expansionist, if we want to put it that way, thinking of potential, I guess I should say, of some of these states. But I think that's
Yeah.
something that we need to keep in mind, because those kind of norms aren't constraining as much as they had, or they don't seem to be in this current period. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Is it a hegemonic Turkey reasserting itself, or anyway? What about Gulf relations with Turkey? Badr, what do you think?
I think Turkey has gone through its own internal revision, if you may, of how they see themselves in the region, how they
Yep.
present themselves, and their relations with the Gulf. I wouldn't call it a hegemonic Turkey or one. I mean, it's one that wants to protect its own interests. It's had its
Mm.
own economic challenges, and the Gulf space would be one in which they can alleviate that. And many countries have been working very closely with Turkey to push along those lines. We're also along the GCC are working on an FTA with them, so that's something also is in the works. So yeah, I see them as, in the region we need to apply a regional approach, and the Gulf states, along with Egypt, Jordan, and the rest, are around with Iran and Turkey, so we need to work with them. And there will be some differences, no doubt, but we need to work with them in getting our region into order.
Yeah, for sure. Mohammed, what do you think?
I would agree with Better. It's not a hegemonic Turkey.
Yeah.
And I don't think the relationship of the GCC with Turkey is going to go back to where it used to be something like 5 years ago. I don't see this as happening. And the reason why I say it's not a hegemonic Turkey, because, for instance, if you're referring to what is happening in Syria and their support to the HTS, they didn't use their own planes, or they didn't use their
Bunch of
own.
Gulf countries will be. So, it's sort of like a riff off of the first question that I asked you, but this one is a bit more specific. So let's start with you, Kristin, again.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Oh, the question is, I want one thing you're going to be looking for out of the Trump administration to help guide you to what the relationship with the GCC states will be like under the Trump administration.
I think, I mean, as we alluded to at the beginning, I'll go back to that. I think these are Gulf states that very much are receptive to seeing a lot of the conflicts and of the region being resolved right now. I think they have very important tools that can help a Trump administration that wants to go in that direction in all of these fronts. I think actually the Gulf states are right now being very positive actors in all of these different policy arenas that we've been talking about today. So I think I would hope that those would be things that the Trump administration would look to positively.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's very good. Badr, what do you think you're going to be looking for in the first couple of months to orient you to where this relationship may be going in the next 4 years?
Sure. I mean, let me couch it in messages. I have two
Yeah,
messages, and this is how I see things. First, I
good.
hope that the incoming U.S. administration looks at the Gulf as equal partners, ones that are not only seen through the prism of oil security or Israel relations, one that is holistic, comprehensive, and that can help them with various files. I truly hope that that's the case. And my second and final message is to the Gulf states, and that they more than ever need to hold on to their own unity. They need to manage their differences and push their agenda forward, one that ensures peace and prosperity in the region.
So the first thing on the first message, what would it look like? How would it be communicated by, just give me one sort of example of how that could be messaged by the incoming Trump administration to Gulf countries.
I think reviving the U.S. GCC working group that we had
Yeah.
how we have currently bilaterals in the different GCC states, I think coming in together with a very comprehensive roadmap for his 4 years moving forward would be a good starting point.
Okay, great. And so that leaves you, Mohammed, to wrap things up for us. What are you going to be looking for to orient you to the direction that the relationship would be taking?
Two directions. One, what is going to be the horse and what is going to be the carriage? Is economy going to be the horse and security the carriage, or security is going to be the? Because that's what used to be the relationship of the
Okay.
U.S. and economy first is where we hope that the relation is going to go. The second one is on this concept of partnership, collaboration. Are these going to be the keywords? Because partnership, collaboration are not about polarity,
Right.
and if these two words become part of the discourse, then as Badr was saying, this is more of an agency, an acceptance of the role, and a partnership that's based on mutual benefit. So that what would guide me over to understand what will happen.
And again, I just want to ask you to elaborate. What would be one way that could be messaged to Gulf countries from Washington? An example. Just give me one example.
The GCC today is an access point, a huge access point that the US can benefit from.
Yeah.
Use it as such. Don't use it as a valve.
Okay.
Close it and open it.
No, I get the idea for sure. That helps a lot. All right. Well, thank you so much, lady and gentlemen. You've been wonderful and really, I think, gave our viewers a lot of information to help guide them over how to judge the course of events in the coming months and over the next 4 years. So we'll join together again before too long to look at where things have been going. But on January 20th, we'll have a new reality, Trump 2.0. And we certainly won't have a new Trump, but we will have a Trump in a new context and therefore new outcomes and new realities. So thank you so much. Thanks to everybody for joining us and listening. Thanks for the great questions. And please join us again very soon for our next AGSI webinar. Have a good day and take it easy.